there everyone, welcome to New Orleans. Well, this is probably how it looked before human settlement. I tried my best with the information given, so it's not perfect, but you get the general idea. This bend along the Mississippi River had higher elevation than the surrounding swamp and marshland. The area even had natural levees along the river to prevent a bit of overflow, so at the time it seemed like a great location. The area is located in a delta region with naturally occurring lobes, which was formed when the Mississippi River deposited sediment there, and the plants grew, trapping more sediment, therefore creating land. If left to its own devices, the Mississippi River's path to the Gulf will change and abandon previously created delta lobes, which will start to sink and erode away. Rinse and repeat, and the process starts all over again. However, this would change when humans built a permanent settlement there, which meant they couldn't allow the Mississippi River's stream to change as it naturally would have. The Mississippi River passes through what would soon be known as New Orleans behind me, which was chosen for a very strategic reason. When New Orleans was settled, drastic measures would be taken to keep the Mississippi River flowing through New Orleans. This decision to keep the river unchanging created a slow disaster that's ever creeping up on the city. Before I get into that, I'll go over the reasons why they settled there, and then explore why New Orleans' future is worrisome. Standing behind me on the other side of the river is a young New Orleans, which was founded in 1718 by the French. Yep, there were quite a bit of land the French colonized in the Americas. When they founded it, the Mississippi Delta Plain stretched across 7,000 square miles, which makes it one of the largest deltas in the world. There was deep water at the end of the delta lobe, which was great for commerce and transportation, so the French realized how great of a location it would be to make a port. The Mississippi River allowed for great economic growth because the river extends through the middle of North America, connecting to other rivers on the continent, meaning easy trade routes via the rivers. The French could easily ship timber, minerals, agricultural products, and if you can remember from my Detroit video, fur. These products could be shipped downriver to New Orleans and then off to Europe. New Orleans was so important to the French that it was made the capital of French Louisiana in 1722. You can still visit this area today in New Orleans. It's called the French Quarter, which is its oldest neighborhood. A year prior to the founding of New Orleans, the French began constructing levees on the Mississippi River to protect it from flooding because New Orleans has many areas below sea level. As you can see here, the city is surrounded by water and faces possible flooding from the Mississippi River bank and Lake Pontchartrain. It's like a bowl, which makes potential flooding a disaster. It was a very intense flood control procedure because not only did they have to build levees to prevent flooding along the river and lake, they had to repair and improve upon it. Instead of realizing how demanding it would be to manipulate the natural processes of the river and settle elsewhere, they decided to stay because the economic incentives were too good to pass up. However, after the 7 Years' War, New Orleans was ceded to Spain in 1763. Afterwards, the territory would be passed between Spain and France until Napoleon sold Louisiana to the United States in 1803. With the United States in control, they too saw the opportunities the region could afford them and began using it for commerce. During the early 1800s, New Orleans was the United States' wealthiest city due to waterborne commerce through its ports. Today, New Orleans port region is responsible for exporting products such as grains, oils, petroleum, and tobacco, and is used to import agricultural products to the United States. This makes New Orleans one of the world's biggest ports, all because of its geography. The Mississippi River runs through New Orleans and the southern tip of Louisiana, lying in the Gulf of Mexico, giving it access to the North Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, perfect for imports and exports. However, there is one problem with that: nature. Going back to 1722, when the French made New Orleans their capital of French Louisiana, a hurricane destroyed most of the city, so something had to be done to prevent future floods. The French did all they could to prevent future floods up until they were no longer governing the region. The flood control tactics of the French would have to be reinforced because New Orleans is sinking by 2 inches per year. As talked about earlier, the area New Orleans was founded on was above sea level. By 1895, 5% of it was below sea level, and by 1935, 30% of it was below sea level. As it's sinking, this meant each event of a flood could possibly be worse than the last. The wealthy business people in the city were now invested in New Orleans, so leaving was now hard to do. So more effective levees were created. Extending from 45 miles south of New Orleans to the Arkansas River, the levee system in 1858 was the longest by far at the time. Unfortunately, floods later that year and the next overwhelmed and damaged the levee system, which meant the US had to raise and strengthen the levee system once again. There were two problems with this at the time. People in the region already paid $40 million on the levee system that was damaged, and 2 years later, the country would enter civil war. It was put on hold until 1879 when the federal government got involved to help develop a better levee system. A trend would appear from here on out. Each time flooding occurred, a more effective levee system would be constructed. It was an attempt to one-up nature, but nature is stubborn and has all the time in the world. Not only did people in New Orleans build a levee system to prevent flooding, they thought it was a good idea to drain water out of the swamplands via pumps. In the 1800s and 1810s, an engineer named Albert Baldwin Wood formed a plan to use pumps to drain water out of the surrounding swampland. And while doing so, this revealed more land to expand the city into. But unfortunately, this pumped out water from underground, which caused air pockets underneath, and the surface sunk to fill in those pockets. These pumps not only remove water but sediments as well, which increases the sinking process. Floods would have brought in more sediments, but human intervention is doing all it can to prevent flooding. It wasn't until decades later until people realized how much of a problem this would cause and how it's hastening the sinking problem. The swamplands aren't being drained as much as it was before, and the pumps are reserved for times of heavy rainfall, but the air pockets the drainage system created are still a problem. Here's one event that would shock New Orleans to its core. In August 2005, a Category 5 tropical storm named Hurricane Katrina would make landfall on New Orleans and overwhelm the levee system, leaving up to 80% of the city flooded by the hurricane. Those who didn't evacuate New Orleans sought shelter in the Superdome Stadium. The structural integrity wasn't perfect and it would be damaged by the storm. Lights were barely able to stay on, water supply will eventually give out, and without air conditioning, the inside was hot and muggy. Tens of thousands of people would be stranded there for a week, and while conditions inside were terrible, only 6 people would die. The entirety of Hurricane Katrina is just depressing when you look at the details. People stuck in nursing homes, unable to escape the flooding, and prisoners left inside their cells. The guards evacuated without releasing them, leaving them in their cells without food and water for days. The sewage water will rise up to their chest or neck, which highlights some of the horrible treatment prisoners get in the United States. There were warning signs of how bad Katrina was going to be, but they were ignored until it was too late. FEMA higher-ups failed to organize the National Guard and evacuation buses before Katrina hit, and failed to make an effective relief response after Katrina made landfall. Here's a bit of a plot twist. When Hurricane Katrina hit the United States, it would land in the southern tip of Florida and seemingly make its way across the Gulf of Mexico. Before people could get a sigh of relief, it would make a sharp turn towards Louisiana and make landfall there. However, the strongest part of the storm would be when it was in the Gulf of Mexico, and New Orleans would miss much of the intense part of the storm. The storm alone shouldn't have been able to overpower the levee system. In fact, Hurricane Ida was much stronger than Katrina when it hit New Orleans, and the levee system held up better during that than in Katrina. Ida was a Category 4 storm, and while Katrina became a Category 5 storm, it was a Category 3 storm when it hit New Orleans. So what happened? The levee system was documented years before Katrina hit that it had vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed. The engineers cut costs and worked on misinformation in regards to sinking land and soil quality. This means the storm wasn't strong enough to overwhelm the levee system itself. It was helped by the inadequate levee design. This is why after a better system was built after Katrina, it did a much more effective job at preventing flooding when future hurricanes made landfall. Had government officials took this more seriously and responded effectively, and no corners were cut in regards to the levee system, Hurricane Katrina's disaster might have been lessened to a great degree, and Katrina would have joined the list of forgettable hurricane names. However, in our timeline, New Orleans was not prepared. This caused $125 billion in damages, making it the most damaging hurricane to hit the United States until Hurricane Harvey in 2017 rivaled it in damages. After Hurricane Katrina, some people returned to rebuild, but the population hasn't returned to where it was before Katrina. To be fair, after its peak in the 1960s, the population has been on a decline, but Hurricane Katrina would create the biggest dip in New Orleans' population, and it doesn't seem it will ever go back to pre-Katrina numbers. The population and economic effect here can't be overstated. As if this wasn't bad enough, New Orleans has future problems that it has to prepare for if it wants to remain a city. I've established that sinking is a problem, and it does so by 2 inches per year, and with that brings potentially more devastating floods. The thing that makes New Orleans' future worrisome is climate change. As ice caps melt and sea levels rise, this will add the need to further reinforce the levee systems. Also, if climate change brings on more powerful storms, if we don't do anything to slow it down. This compounded with the previously mentioned problems creates a worrisome future for New Orleans. So, are there solutions to this problem? Let's see if there are some positives to this story. Reinforcing the levee systems can only reduce the risk of flooding so much before sinking land and rising sea levels pushes us to reinforce them once again. History has shown this to be the case. A solution could include relocating the population to higher elevated areas in the city, and elevating homes could protect people from floods. Recently, in 2021, the federal government spent $14.5 billion on flood and storm protection, so this means the US is still fighting to keep New Orleans around. Hopefully, it's more than just a band-aid to the problem. The story of New Orleans is much more than the geographical problems it's currently facing, but I thought it was something to do research on and talk about it. Something a bit different from the usual social political lens I've applied to recent historical topics. Let me know if you want more history videos from other perspectives, or dive into the social political side of New Orleans' story. If you want to keep the channel going or help fund my upcoming series, you can become a patron. The link is down below and any amount is greatly appreciated. Anyways, I gotta go. Be nice to one another and take care of yourselves.